The phone behind the counter started buzzing at 2 in the morning, and Eli Brandt knew before he picked it up that the voice on the other end would not be kind. He let it ring twice. The fluorescent light over Register 2 had been flickering for a week, throwing the empty aisles into a stutter of brightness and shadow. And in that broken light, his own hands looked older than 23. Outside the highway was a black river, with nothing moving on it. He picked up the phone. "You're short again," the voice said. It was Dale Voss, the man who owned the station, and 4 others like it along the interstate. $40. Friday's count. You want to tell me where it went? Eli did not tell him where it went. He stood there in the humming dark and said nothing, because the truth was a thing he could not afford to say out loud. The silence stretched. Voss let it stretch, the way a man lets a rope play out when he already knows the other end is tied to something he owns. "I'll find it," Eli said finally. "You'll find it Friday," Voss said. "Or you'll find another job. And good luck with that, son. Good luck explaining the gap in your till to the next man who hires you." The line went dead. Eli set the phone down with a care that did not match the thing happening in his chest. $40. He had, until Friday, he had $11 in his account and a transmission going soft. In a truck, he needed to reach a job that paid him barely enough to keep the truck. He pressed his palms flat against the counter and breathed, and the cooler motors droned behind him, and somewhere out on the interstate a single engine note rose and then faded into nothing. He had not stolen the $40. That was the part he could not say. 3 weeks back, on a night exactly like this one, a man had pushed open that glass door and changed the shape of Eli's life. And Eli had not understood it yet. That man had been big, not tall so much as built, like something poured into a mold and left to set, shoulders that filled the doorframe, a gray beard going to white at the chin. He wore a black leather cut, scarred and softened with years, and across the back of it, Eli would later learn, was the patch of a club he had only ever heard about in the way people talk about weather in another state. The man had walked the way. Certain men walk slow and without hurry, as though the world had already agreed to wait for him. It was raining that night. The man's bike sat dead under the canopy, a heavy machine gone silent, chrome-streaked with road grime. He came to the counter dripping and set down a credit card and asked for $40 of premium and a coffee, and the card came back declined. He tried it again, declined. He stood there, this enormous man, and something moved across his weathered face that Eli recognized, because Eli wore it himself most days. It was the particular stillness of a person doing math that does not add up. "Card reader does that sometimes," Eli had said, which was a lie. The reader was fine. He pulled 2 20s from his own wallet, the last cash he had until payday, and fed them into the drawer and rang the fuel and slid the coffee across. "You're good, pumps on." The man looked at him for a long moment. "I don't take what I haven't paid for," he said. His voice was low, a gravel rumble that seemed to come up out of the floor. "You're not taking anything," Eli said. "Reader glitched happens all the time." He held the man's gaze and did not blink. "Coffee's hot. Roads are bad. Get where you're going." The man's eyes went to the name stitched on Eli's shirt, then to his face, and then to the cash drawer. And Eli understood that the man knew exactly what had just happened and was choosing whether to allow a stranger to carry his debt out into the rain. It was a strange thing to watch a powerful man weigh. The man nodded once, slow. He took the coffee. At the door, he stopped. "What's your name? Your real name, not the shirt." Eli. Eli. The man said it the way you'd set a stone on a shelf. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. And a minute later, the dead bike was not dead. It coughed and caught and rolled out into the black taillight, shrinking. And Eli went back to wiping down a counter that did not need wiping. He had not thought it through. That was the simple shape of it. He had given away $40. He did not have to a stranger he would never see again. And 3 weeks later, that $40 gap had found its way into Dale Voss's Friday count, and now it was a noose. He had only been kind on a night he could not afford to be, and the world had its own arithmetic for that. Eli was not a soft man. People who met him at the register saw a quiet kid with careful hands and assumed the quiet was weakness. It was not. His mother had raised him alone in a trailer, 2 towns over, working double shifts at a laundry that smelled of bleach and hot lint, and she had never once let him see her tired until the cancer made it impossible to hide. It took her slow. It took her when he was 19. He remembered the hospital corridors more than he remembered the trailer, the particular green of the walls, the vending machine that ate his last dollar the night she stopped breathing, the woman at the billing window who slid a clipboard across the counter while his mother was still warm 2 floors up and said, "That there were forms." The bills from that had followed him like a second shadow ever since, sold and resold to men who called at dinner time and spoke to him by his first name as though they knew him. So he knew what it was to be ground down by men with clipboards and polite voices. He knew the particular cruelty of a soft tone wrapped around a hard number. He knew Dale Voss was one of those men the moment Voss first walked the floor of the station, running a finger along a shelf, checking for dust that was not there. The kindness Eli had shown the rider was not innocence. It was the opposite of innocence. It was a thing he did precisely because he knew how the cold felt from the inside, and he could not stand to watch another person walk out into it when $20 sat folded in his wallet, doing nothing but waiting to be spent on a transmission that was dying anyway. Friday came the way bad days come, too fast and too slow. At once Voss arrived at noon in a clean gray sedan that had never once been dirty. He was a lean man, expensive in a quiet way, soft hands, and a watch that cost more than Eli's truck. He wore a pressed shirt with no tie and the confident ease of a man who had never in his life been told no by anyone who could make it stick. He came around the counter without asking, which a man does, only in a place he believes belongs to him, and he opened a drawer and counted it himself, his lips moving, and Eli stood against the cigarette rack and watched institutional certainty do its work. 40 short, Voss said, as though he had discovered it, rather than predicted it. Same as last week. I'll cover it out of my check, Eli said. You'll cover it, and then you'll go. Voss closed the drawer with one finger. I run a clean operation. I can't have a register. I can't trust. You understand. It isn't personal. He said, it isn't personal the way men like him always say it, which is to say he meant it precisely. The cruelty was not personal at all. Eli was simply a number that had stopped balancing. What Eli did not know, what no one in that fluorescent box knew, was that on a rain-slick night 3 weeks earlier, a man named Cutter had ridden away from the station with a debt he had never agreed to carry, and that Cutter did not forget debts. Voss told him to clean out his locker. Eli cleaned out his locker. There was not much in it. A spare shirt, paperback, gone soft at the spine, a photograph of his mother squinting into sun. He carried the small box out past the pumps to his truck and set it on the passenger seat, and the transmission ground when he put it in reverse. And he sat there a moment with his hands on the wheel and his jaw set hard against the thing rising in his throat. He did not cry. He had learned a long time ago that crying was a luxury, and luxuries were for people with margin. He drove home in a truck that might not make the trip and walked into a one-room apartment that smelled of the radiator and sat on the edge of the bed and tried to do the math of a life with no job and $11 and a transmission dying by the mile. He did not hear from anyone for 9 days. On the 10th day, the engines came. He heard them before he saw them, the way you hear a storm before the sky goes dark. He was sitting on the concrete step outside his building, with a cup of instant coffee gone cold in his hands, watching the parking lot when the sound rolled in off the county road. It started as a vibration. He felt in the soles of his feet before his ears caught up to it. It was not one engine. It was many a low collective thunder that climbed and deepened until the windows behind him hummed in their frames, and a dog 2 buildings down began to bark, and then thought better of it. They came around the corner in a column, headlights cutting the gray afternoon, chrome catching what little sun there was, a disciplined formation of heavy machines that filled the narrow lot and did not scatter or idle loose, but arranged themselves with the precision of men who had done this 1,000 times 2 by 2, then a clean turn, then still. The engines cut almost as one. The silence after was its own kind of sound. Eli stood up, the cold coffee shook in his hand, and he set it down on the step. He counted 9 bikes, then 11, then stopped counting. Leather and beards and weathered faces. Patches he did not recognize. Boots coming down on the asphalt in a slow, scattered rhythm. At the center of the column, swinging a leg off a machine that ticked as it cooled, was the big man from the rain cutter. Eli's heart was going hard now, the way it had not gone even when Voss counted the drawer. Because a man losing his job is one kind of fear, and a wall of strangers arriving for you, filling every exit from your own front step, is another kind entirely. Cutter walked toward him. Behind Cutter came an older man, heavy-set and barrel-chested, well over 6 feet, with a full gray beard and rings on thick fingers and a stillness about him that made the others seem to orbit. The patch on his cut read, President above, Death's Head insignia, and below it the name of the club, the Iron Vigil. Eli did not know what any of it meant. He only knew that the man moved through the others the way deep water moves, slow and total, and that everyone in the lot had arranged themselves in relation to him without being told. Eli, Cutter said. It was not a question. I gave you the gas, Eli said, and his voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. I'm not asking for it back. Something happened in Cutter's face, then a small movement at the corner of the mouth that was not quite a smile. He turned to the older man. This is him. The president looked at Eli for a long moment. His eyes were pale and unhurried, and they went over Eli the way a man reads a page he already half knows. 3 weeks ago, the president said, his voice a low gravel that carried without rising, one of mine broke down on the interstate in the rain with a card that wouldn't run. He was 400 miles from his own bed, and nobody at that station owed him a thing. He paused. You covered his fuel out of your own pocket. You told him a lie to let him keep his pride. Then you let him ride off without ever once expecting to see him again. It was $40, Eli said. It was the last 40 you had, the president said. He let that sit. Cutter rode home and told me about it. We don't forget that. We are not built to forget that. Eli's throat worked. How did you find me? You told him your name, Cutter said. Wasn't hard after that. The relief that moved through Eli was a fragile illusion, and he knew it even as he felt it, because grateful men on motorcycles are still a wall of strangers in your parking lot, and he had learned never to trust the first warm thing in a cold week. He kept his back straight. "I appreciate it," he said. "I do. But I don't need anything. I'm all right." The president's pale eyes did not move. "You lost your job," he said. It was not a guess. Eli said nothing. "9 days ago," the president went on, "a man named Voss owns this station, and 4 others counted your drawer short $40 and put you out the door for it." He tilted his head a fraction. "You want to tell me where that 40 went, son, or should I?" And Eli understood, standing there in the cold lot with the engines ticking, that these men already knew they had not come to thank him. They had come because the thanks had led them somewhere, and the somewhere was a man named Dale Voss, and the look on the president's face was the look of someone who had found a debt that ran in 2 directions at once. The president's name was Gus Renner, though almost no one used it. The club called him Deacon, a name he had carried for 30 years, for reasons no one explained, and Eli would only ever hear it once. He sat now at the scarred wooden table in the back of a clubhouse Eli had never imagined existing, a low cinder-block building at the industrial edge of town with a steel door and a neon sign in the window that buzzed faintly, and around him the room smelled of stale beer, cigarette smoke, machine oil, and old leather. Eli sat where they had put him on a stool near the bar, and he watched the club arrange the information they had gathered the way other men arrange tools before a job. It was the younger one who did the talking. He was lean and quick-eyed, maybe 28, with close cropped hair and ink down both forearms and a laptop open in front of him that looked badly out of place against the bar wood. The others called him Wire. He was the one who had spent the 9 days while Eli sat on his step doing math, with no answer. Wire did not break laws to find things, or if he did not say so. He simply knew how to read the world, how public records and county filings and the small, bright trails that men like Voss leave behind, without thinking, could be assembled into a shape. "Dale Voss," Wire said, turning the laptop so Deacon could see, "owns the 5 stations outright. But he's leveraged, took a development loan 2 years ago against a strip of commercial frontage out by the county line. Here's the thing." He pulled up another document. The frontage was rezoned right before he bought it, agricultural to commercial. That rezoning went through a county subcommittee on a 3-2 vote, and one of the 3 yes votes was a man whose wife's consulting firm billed Voss $18,000 the same quarter for, and I'm quoting the invoice, strategic advisory services. The room was quiet. Deacon turned a ring on his finger. Slow. "It's not a crime to hire a consultant," Wire said. "It's a crime when the consultant is a commissioner's wife and the advice is a vote. There's a state ethics statute. There's a disclosure he never filed." He closed the laptop. "Voss built his whole operation on that frontage loan. The loan depends on the zoning. The zoning depends on a vote he bought. If the right people get the paper, the whole thing comes down, and he knows it. That's why he runs his stations like a man squeezing every dime. He's not rich. He's leveraged to the throat and pretending." Eli sat very still on his stool. He had walked into this building believing he was a man being thanked for a small kindness, and he was beginning to understand he had walked into something with a much longer memory and a much wider reach. "I don't want anything to do with that," Eli said. The room turned toward him. He made himself keep going. "I don't want his money. I don't want him hurt. I just want to be left out of it. I gave a guy gas. That's all this was ever supposed to be." Deacon looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had gone quieter, which somehow made it carry further. "You think this is about your $40, isn't it?" "No?" Deacon set both hands flat on the table. "A man does a thing for nothing, expecting nothing, on the worst night of his own month. That tells us who he is. And then another man, a man with a watch and a clean car and a vote in his pocket, throws that first man into the street over the exact same $40. He let it land. That tells us who he is, too. We didn't come here to pay you back. Son, we came because we wanted to know which one of you was lying to himself about what he is. Now we know, and we don't walk away from that." Eli's hands were trembling, and he pressed them between his knees. The fear in him was real, but underneath it, in a place he did not want to look at directly, something else had begun to move. He had spent his whole life being the number that stopped balancing. He had never once, not at his mother's bedside, not at any clipboard counter, not anywhere, watched the world arrange itself to stand between him and the men who ground him down. He did not have a word for what it did to him. He only knew his eyes were stinging and he hated it, and he kept his face flat against it. The Iron Vigil did not move against Dale Voss with engines or fists. That was the first thing Eli learned about them, and it surprised him. He had expected, somewhere in the animal part of his brain, that men who looked like these would solve a problem, the way the movies said they would. They did not. Deacon would not allow it. There was a code in that cinder-block room, unspoken and absolute, and the code held that you did not become the thing you were standing against. The strength of the club was not in its capacity to break a man. It was in its patience, its memory, and its willingness to let the truth do the breaking. It took 11 days. In those 11 days, Eli stayed in a back room of the clubhouse because the enforcer, a granite-faced man named Boone, who wore the patch of sergeant-at-arms and spoke maybe 40 words a day, had said it was not smart for Eli to be alone in his apartment while things moved, and no one argued with Boone. Boone was a wall of a man with a single white scar through his left eyebrow and eyes that missed nothing. And for the first 3 days he treated Eli with a flat wariness that bordered on contempt, as though the kid were a stray that had wandered in and might yet prove to be trouble. Eli understood it. He did not take it personally. He had been the stray before. He knew that trust in rooms like this was a thing you were handed in pieces or not at all. So he made himself useful in the only language he trusted, which was work. He swept the floors without being asked. He found the supply closet and reorganized it because the wrench drawers were a chaos no working shop should tolerate. He fixed the dripping tap behind the bar with a washer he found in a coffee can full of mismatched hardware. And when the old jukebox in the corner started swallowing quarters, he had the back panel off it inside 10 minutes and a bent contact straightened inside 15. And an old member named Pete, who had not spoken to him, once sat down across from the machine and played the same song 3 times, just to be sure. On the 4th day, Boone watched him reseat the loose power jack on Wire's laptop with a steady hand and a borrowed soldering iron. No shake in his fingers, no wasted motion, and something in the big man's posture shifted, a fraction. That evening, Boone set a plate of food down in front of Eli without a word, a slab of brisket and bread and a pickle on the side, and stood there a moment as if he might say something, and did not, and walked away. That was the whole of it. The warmth of these men was never spoken. It arrived as a plate, a nod, a door held open, a song played 3 times to test a repair. Eli had grown up starving for exactly that kind of warmth, and had learned to recognize it precisely because it was so rarely aimed at him, and he ate the brisket slow in the buzzing light, and did not let himself think too hard about the thing rising behind his ribs. Wire built the file. He did it carefully, the way you defuse a thing rather than detonate it. The ethics disclosure Voss had failed to file. The invoice from the commissioner's wife, the timeline of the rezoning vote laid against the timeline of the payment, so close together that no honest explanation survived the overlap. The development loan and the way its terms collapsed, if the zoning was ever challenged. Wire assembled it all into a single clean package. And then he did the thing that Eli would remember longest, the thing that taught him what these men actually were. He did not send it to a newspaper. He did not send it to the police, who, Deacon said with quiet certainty, had already looked at Voss twice and found reasons each time to look away. He made copies. One copy he addressed to the State Ethics Commission, the real one, the body that could not so easily be made to look away. One copy he set aside. On the 12th day, they brought Dale Voss to the clubhouse. They did not take him. Eli wanted that understood later when he told the story, which was almost never. They did not lay a hand on him. Boone and Cutter simply went to Voss's clean gray sedan in the lot of his flagship station at closing, in full daylight, and stood on either side of it, and Cutter leaned down to the window and said something Eli never heard, and Voss followed them. He followed them because a man who has spent his life relying on the threat of institutions does not know what to do when the institutions are not in the room, and the two men outside his car were very much in the room, and they had not raised their voices, and that was somehow worse. Voss came through the steel door at dusk. Eli was at the bar. He watched the man enter the world he ran his small empire from a great distance from, and he watched the certainty drain out of him by degrees. The clubhouse did that to men like Voss. The cinder block, and the neon, and the wall of leather did in 5 seconds what no argument could do. There was no front desk here, no letterhead, no procedure to invoke, nothing he could threaten to file or sue or report, and a man who had built his whole self out of those things found there was very little left of him without them. Voss's eyes went around the room, counting exits, finding none that mattered, snagging for half a second on Eli at the bar, and then skating away as though the sight of the kid he had thrown out cost him something to hold. His soft hands began to do a small, restless thing at his sides. Deacon sat at the head of the scarred table. He did not stand when Voss came in. He let the man walk to him. "You know why you're here?" Deacon said. "I don't know what this is," Voss said, and his voice had the wrong amount of air in it. "If this is about the Brandt kid, I followed procedure. There was a shortage. I have records. I have every right to—" "Sit down." Voss sat down. He sat because the voice left no other option, and Eli watched a man who had counted a cash drawer with 2 fingers and called it justice discover what it was to be on the other side of a table from someone who could not be billed, bought, or filed against. Wire set the package down in front of Voss. Just the one copy, the one that had been set aside. Voss looked at it. He did not touch it. He read the cover sheet upside down, and Eli watched the blood go out of his face. In real time. Watched institutional armor that had never once failed the man simply cease to exist around him. "This is the disclosure you never filed," Wire said, conversational, almost gentle. "This is the invoice. This is the vote. This is the loan that dies the day the zoning gets challenged." He tapped the folder once. "A copy of this is already with the State Ethics Commission, mailed, certified. You can't unsend it. They'll take their time the way they do. But it's gone, and it lands whether you do anything or not." What do you want? Voss's voice had collapsed to almost nothing. The entitled music was gone out of it entirely. Money. Is that it? How much? And here was the moment Eli had been afraid of, the moment he had braced for since the engines first came around the corner. He waited for the demand, the squeeze, the proof that these men were only another kind of Voss with louder machines. It did not come. Deacon looked at the man across the table with something that was not quite contempt and not quite pity. "We don't want your money," he said. "There's nothing you have that we want. The commission already has what it needs. That part is done. It was done before you walked in." He leaned forward, and the neon caught the gray of his beard. "You're here so you understand one thing, and you carry it out that door with you. The kid you put on the street over $40. He's ours now. You don't know his name anymore. You don't say it. You don't think it. If he ever has trouble finding work in his county, if a single door closes on him that you had a hand in, the second copy of that folder finds a reporter instead of a commission, and your slow, quiet ending becomes a fast, loud one." He sat back. "That's all. That's the whole of it. You can go." Voss looked around the room one more time at the leather and the silence and the kid at the bar he had thrown away, and something in his face came apart. But the shape of begging was on him, the loose mouth, and the wet eyes, and the hands that did not know where to go. And Eli felt no triumph watching it, only a strange and weary sadness, because he had spent enough years being small to know that there was no joy at the bottom of any of this. Voss stood. He went to the steel door. He pushed out into the last gray light of the evening, into the world that had always reasserted itself for him, and this time it did not. The door swung shut. A minute later, his clean gray car pulled out of the lot and turned onto the county road and was gone, and no one in the clubhouse watched it go. They had already turned back to their own evening, to the bar and the low talk and the work of being what they were. Eli sat at the bar with his hands flat on the wood. He did not feel rescued. That was not the word for it. He felt the way a man feels when a weight he has carried so long. He forgot its presence is finally set down, the strange ache of muscles learning they no longer have to hold. Boone came and stood beside him, and the big enforcer was quiet a while. Then he said, "You did a thing for nothing." He was not looking at Eli. He was looking at the bottles behind the bar. "Most people, you ask them why. They tell you a story, makes them the hero. You never told us why." "There's no story," Eli said. "He was cold. I had the money. That's all it was." Boone nodded slowly, as if Eli had confirmed something he had been checking for. "Yeah," he said. "That's all it ever is, with the real ones." He set a hand on Eli's shoulder, once heavy as a stone, and then he was gone down the bar, and Eli sat in the warmth of the buzzing neon and understood that he had passed a test he had not known he was taking, and that the passing had cost him nothing but the truth, which was the only thing he had ever had to give. It was Cutter who told him about the work. 3 days later, the club did not run only on memory and engines. It ran a legitimate thing, too, a custom shop 2 miles down the industrial road, where men in leather did honest, skilled work on machines that people drove in from 3 states away, and the shop needed hands that were steady and patient and did not flinch at hard problems. And Cutter had watched Eli reseat a power jack and fix a tap and sweep a floor. No one asked him to sweep. "You're good with your hands," Cutter said. It was not a question, the way nothing Cutter said was ever a question. "Shop opens at 7. You don't have to take it. But the offer doesn't expire, and it doesn't come with strings. You'd be working, we'd be paying you. That's the whole arrangement." Eli took it. Of course, he took it. But he took it the way he did everything, carefully watching for the catch. And it was weeks before he understood that there was no catch, that the world he had stumbled into operated on a logic he had never been allowed to believe was real, where a man's worth was measured by what he did when he thought no one who mattered was watching, and where a debt of kindness was a sacred thing that ran in both directions and did not expire. He learned the shop. He was good at it, better than good, and the men learned to trust his hands, and then, slower, to trust him. He came in before 7 and stayed past dark, learned the difference between a sound a healthy engine makes and the sound it makes when it is lying to you. He learned to read a machine the way wire read a county filing, patiently, refusing to be hurried, and the older men noticed and stopped explaining things twice. He learned their names and their silences. He learned that Wire had a daughter he saw on weekends and kept a drawing of hers taped inside the lid of the toolbox, where only he could see it. He learned that Boone had buried a brother, years back, a younger one, and never said the name, and that on the anniversary of it the big man rode out alone before dawn and came back at dusk, and no one asked where. He learned that Deacon, who almost never came to the shop, had once been a young man as lost as Eli, pulled in off a worse road than the one Eli walked, and that the name Deacon was not about church, but about a debt the old man had spent 30 years paying down a kindness at a time. He did not become one of them, not the way the patch made a man. One of them that was a thing earned over years, blood and time and tests far harder than a swept floor, and Eli was only at the beginning of it. But he belonged to their orbit. Now, he was theirs to look after. When his transmission finally died for good, he came in one morning to find it pulled and rebuilt and dropped back in his truck overnight. No note, no bill, the only evidence a smear of grease on the seat and cutter, pretending not to wash his face from across the bay. The difference between that and the life he had been living, the life of clipboards and dinner-time phone calls and a $40 gap that could end him, was the difference between a held breath and the moment you finally let it out. He never saw Dale Voss again. He heard things. He heard the Ethics Commission moved slow, and then all at once the way Wire said it would, and that the rezoning got pulled into a county review, and that the development loan called itself due, and that Voss sold his stations one by one to cover what came apart, and that the clean gray car was seen less and less until it was not seen at all. Eli took no pleasure in it. He had learned from men who knew the underworld better than anyone that the satisfaction was never in the falling of the bad man. It was only ever in the standing of the good one. A year on, almost to the night, Eli was the last one at the shop, closing up, and a storm was coming in off the county road, the first hard rain of the autumn. He was wiping down a workbench that did not need wiping, a habit he had never lost, when headlights swung across the bay door and a single bike pulled in under the canopy out of the wet. A stranger, a man he did not know, older, soaked through and shaking with a machine gone dead beneath him and a thin jacket, no good against this weather, and the particular stillness on his face of a person doing math that does not add up. The man got off the bike, slow, favoring one knee, and stood in the doorway, dripping, and Eli watched him gather himself to ask for something he did not believe he would get. Eli set down the rag. He came around the bench, wiping his hands on a shop towel, taking his time so the man would not feel rushed. The stranger started to say something about a card that would not run, and a town 4 hours off, and a daughter expecting him by morning, the words coming fast and apologetic the way they come from a man used to being turned away, and Eli raised a hand and stopped him gentle. "Roll it into the bay," Eli said. "Coffee's still hot in the office. Let's get you dry and see what she needs." No charge on the look. We'll worry about the rest after. The man looked at him the way Eli had once looked at Cutter across a counter in the rain, wary, braced for the catch, certain there was always a catch. Eli only held the door and waited. And as the stranger wheeled the dead bike in out of the rain and the storm came down hard and warm on the metal roof above them, Eli understood that the debt he had handed across a counter on the worst night of his life had not been repaid and closed. It had never been a thing that could be closed. It had been passed on, and it would go on being passed on, hand to cold hand, down a road longer than any one man could ride. That was the whole of the code, the thing the patch on a man's back only ever stood for, and he had it now in his own two steady hands, and it smelled like rain and engine oil and the beginning of something that would not end. If this story put a warmth in your chest, if you have ever been the one out in the cold or the one who held the door, stay a moment and let it sit with you. Leave a word below for the person in your own life who once carried your debt without being asked. And if you want more stories of the people the world overlooks and the unlikely places that take them in, you know what to do.